Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Grow Farmer Forum on using seed impact mills for weed control. I'm Emily Unglesby. I'm the Director of Outreach and Extension for Grow, and we have a really great farmer panel lined up for you. They will introduce themselves in more detail a little later here, but we have Rodney Schronk from Texas and Nick and Dale Druffel from Washington State. Our moderator is going to be Dr. Michael Flessner with Virginia Tech. And we also have off camera Dr. Drew Lyons from Washington State University, who is going to be our resident expert on weed management in the Pacific Northwest, which is actually where we've discovered a lot of these seed impact mills are in use right now on farms. So we also have Dr. Mark Van Gessel from the University of Delaware watching the chat and the Q&A to help us out here. And just a couple housekeeping things. This is a Zoom webinar, so you can't talk, but you do have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and a chat. Feel free to use the chat if you have any issues you want to communicate to us, but any questions can be put in the Q&A box. And I think we will hold most of those until the end, unless there's a really obvious place for it to pop one in, and then Dr. Van Gessel will pop in with that. We also will offer some CEU credits at the very end. So if you're waiting for those, we will do them towards the end of the Q&A. We'll put up that QR code and you can get them then. And I just want to plug a couple things. Michael, if you'll advance the slide before I let us get started. I hope most of you are familiar with Grow, but if not, I have our website up here. It's a really good resource on integrated weed management. We have news, research, resources, tools on non-chemical weed management options, as well as a lot of information about managing herbicide resistance. So you can subscribe to the website and get a weekly newsletter. And you can also follow us on a number of social media platforms that I've listed here. And one final resource I wanted to mention is Weed Smart, which is an Australian organization that was started in response to their herbicide-resistant weed epidemic over there. So harvest weed seed control is very common in Australia. The majority of farmers are using some version of harvest weed seed control. So you can find really good resources and information on things like seed impact mills there. So that's another great resource. I think that's everything I wanted to mention before we get started. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Flessner.
All right, thanks, Emily. Well, I'm really excited about this Farmer Forum for a lot of reasons, but personally, I've been researching this space since 2015, and to have farmers that have experience with this and are able to share that experience with others is really a cool place to be. But before we get to that conversation, I wanted to talk about what is harvest weed seed control and what are seed impact mills. So harvest weed seed control is a fairly self-explanatory name, but it really takes advantage of what you see in the picture here of those weed seeds that are on the plant and retained at the time of harvest. Those end up in the combine. And with a conventional harvest, we are just spreading those weed seeds out across the farm and in some cases from field to field. So this is actually Ray Harrington's farm in Western Australia, and he really ran out of control options due to herbicide resistance and other factors to control what it was here is rigid ryegrass, so very closely related to our Italian ryegrass. And so basically he was forced to innovate or maybe get out of the wheat business. And so the harvest weed seed control, and in particular the integrated Harrington seed destructor that was named after him, was the advancement that he made there. So basically taking that opportunity of the weed seeds coming through the combine to manage those is what harvest weed seed control is all about. I think it's really important to note that these aren't just kind of any old weed seeds, though. These weed seeds that are there have beaten whatever you've thrown at them that year, right? Whether that was your herbicide program, whether that was crop competition, whatever it was, they've kind of won that battle, right? And currently we are rewarding them across millions of acres in the United States and around the world with a conventional harvest. And so by trying to kill those with, in this case, a seed impact mill, it really puts a stop right there to those weed seeds before we spread them out around the farm. So this is one of the seed impact mills on the market. Here you see a Redekop attached to a John Deere combine, and you can see it's kind of down there below the straw chopper spreader. So all the seed impact mills generally have to have a baffle added into the combine, and that keeps what's coming off the sieves, that chaff stream, that's directed down into the seed impact mill there. The straw stream, or the large residues, what comes off of the rotor, are still going to go through the spreader and chopper as they normally would. So you're not processing all the residues that come out of the back of the combine there, but they go into those mills, and that's we'll see how they work here in a couple slides. There's 3 currently commercially available, and we'll try to talk about all these today. The iHSD is on the left there. It's a vertical mill, so it has actually a cross auger that feeds the residues into the mills, and they actually have a suction. They draw some wind also, so that feeds the residues out of that box there in the middle and through those mills. Both the Seed Terminator and the Redekop you see in the middle and right side have a horizontal orientation, and the Seed Terminator there has it's kind of exposed, so you can see what it looks like. Obviously, during operation, the straw chopper and spreader would kind of come back down and enclose around it, but the weed seeds are fed into the middle of those, and then they have to work their way to the outside there. So what that looks like here for the Seed Terminator, and they all more or less work similar to this, is there's going to be a drive belt coming off the combine that's turning that pulley that's being turned by hand in this video. But the weed seeds fall down into the middle, and then as there's rings of stators that are stationary, and the rotors are what's spinning, and the weed seeds have to get through that. And so they really just get knocked around until either their seed coat is broken or the internal organs are damaged. So that's how they work. The research on are these effective at killing weed seeds is yes, they are. All brands are very effective at killing the weed seeds. Generally over 98% kill. The one weed that we've had less of a kill rate with is Italian ryegrass, where we've seen more of a 90 to 95% kill. So they are very effective from a lot of different people who have evaluated them. They also do come at a price tag. So retail, with anything equipment in ag, the end price you get is going to be depending on who you buy it from and how many you buy and what you're putting it on and all that. But a nice kind of ballpark number that comes to mind for me is about 75,000 US. So it is somewhat of a sticker shock when you first hear that to some people, but when you spread that across acres, the price comes down substantially. In Australia, they kind of equate it to about the price of a cheap herbicide pass, but we'll get into that more as we go here. So let's get to the farmers here, and I guess maybe we'll start with Nick and Dale Druffel. If you guys could just introduce yourself and your farm, what crops you grow, what your climate is like, particularly around harvest time when we're using these devices, and then of course what weeds you're dealing with.
I'm Nick Druffel.
I'm Dale Druffel.
So we grow wheat, peas, lentils, chickpeas, and a little bit of barley once in a while. Our climate, we have a rainfall. We're dry land, so we're anywhere from 16 to 21 inches, just depending on the year and depending on where our farm location is.
Great. What specific weeds are you battling there?
We're battling a little bit of Italian rye, wild oats, dog fennel, you name it, we're battling it probably.
Okay. And any specific maybe herbicide resistance issues in those weeds?
No, I wouldn't say we have any issues with herbicide resistant yet. We've taken over a couple farms with Italian ryegrass on it, but it was never taken care of. So before we bought the Terminator, we were able to get it under control.
Very good. How about you, Rodney? Can you describe your farming operation?
We farm in Central Texas, south of Dallas, about an hour. We farm cotton, corn, wheat, and sunflowers. As far as just a broad spectrum weed problem, Italian ryegrass is a major issue in our winter months and our summer months. Our big problem is red red-rooted pigweeds, and we are starting to see a little bit of root Johnson grass becoming a problem as well as far as resistance. I would say all 3 of what I just mentioned do have herbicide resistance. As far as our climate, We are all a dryland farm. We have typically 35 inches, 36 inches of rain, but we can have 20 and we can have 50. It's we can see a lot of variation in our rainfall patterns, but typically during harvest, as you ask, wheat harvest typically is a damper, wetter climate. Our corn and sunflower harvest is usually brutally dry, desert-like climate, 110 degrees, no rain for 60 days type situation when we're harvesting our corn and sunflowers. Of course, this doesn't apply, but cotton, we kind of is the transition to back to our wetter season. So,
Great. I'm curious where you first learned about seed impact mills and how ultimately you came to decide to invest in one on your farm. Maybe we'll go first with Rodney. Yeah, this time.
a little bit of mine's an odd story. My son was actually in a professor's class at Texas A&M that was talking about these very issues. He was in a class on this, and my son got to tell me about it as a possibility because Italian ryegrass does have a very strong resistance to glyphosate. And he brought this up to me, and we kind of went down that rabbit trail and come in contact with Dr. Muthu and then with Redekop, which is a unit we use, and ultimately to Emily. So that's kind of our trail to this point.
Okay. And so how did you, I guess I'm curious what kind of combine you've modified with the Redekop, and I guess why did you choose that brand, or maybe with the researcher it might have been chosen for you, but
Yes, it was chosen for us.
okay.
But we have it on a John Deere S670 is what we have it on.
Very good. Well, how about Nick and Dale? Same question to you guys. Curious where you first learned about it and which one you chose and why.
So in 2017, I was fortunate enough to go work for a John Deere dealership over in Australia. And they shipped me out in the middle of WA, which had the very first prototype Seed Terminator in my area of responsibility. So I was able to see it, actually work with it, and see, it was very, very interesting to me to see what was going on because a good friend of mine sent me over there. Back in 2019, I went back again, and Seed Terminator was in full production. And I could see then that the Harrington and what guys were trying to achieve over there with chaff aligning, chaff carts, it was a big issue for them. Well, when I came back home, it's like, we really need to look into this. And so we've always been in contact with Seed Terminator. And the friend of mine that he worked for Seed Terminator, and he got us on the path to head down that road. And so we jumped in. We thought we better be proactive than reactive on this seed issue.
Yeah, very good. That when I got a chance to visit Australia, that was a big takeaway for me, was trying to be more proactive, and this is certainly, I think, one way to do that. You mentioned, Nick, you had maybe you'd seen the iHSD as well. I guess, was there any thought about you selecting the iHSD over the Seed Terminator, or what maybe sort of some strengths and weaknesses you looked at there?
No, well, I only heard the Harringtons. I never really got to see them.
Okay.
Action was just Seed Terminator that I worked with.
Okay. Very good. I know there are a lot of Harrington seed destructors out there in Australia, and we certainly have some within our Grow Research Network too. So maybe as the questions go, I'll kind of interject with more information where I think it's necessary on those. But maybe we'll continue with the Druffels here. What are you running it in all the crops, or just certain crops?
We're running it in all the crops. We have one combine with and one combine without, and the combine that we have it on is an S680. And where the weed pressure is bad, we run that combine in the weed pressure, and the other combine cuts stuff that doesn't have that problem.
Okay, and you've had a variety of crops. Are all crops created equal in terms of operating the seed impact mill there, or have you had
No, no,
Okay.
we've got some issues. They do not like green,
Okay.
period. So when it comes to cutting lentils, we have to change out our mills to a high flow mill grate. Otherwise, they'll plug instantly. We try to keep that combine. If we have any, we learned one day that it does not like China lettuce. It plugs instantly. So we kind of have to pick and choose a little bit. If it's too green, even in green wheat, it will plug. But for the most part, you know, it's the last 2 years for us just been a huge learning curve, and we're getting a handle on it.
Okay. Yeah. I'd like to get into that more. One thing you did mention though was the different screens for Seed Terminator, and that's something that they have that the other brands don't, is a higher throughput screen there. And what that does in terms of it does sacrifice seed kill a little bit. So your seed kill goes down a little bit, but you get the higher capacity for that. Um,
Correct.
let's go to Rodney. What crops are you running it in all your crops, and how do you choose where to run it or maybe where not to run it?
So as Nick said, it's been a learning curve. So that's kind of a drawn out answer to your question. But number one, our primary purpose behind it was for hard, soft winter wheat harvest, and it has worked flawlessly in that scenario. We've had no trouble whatsoever. We ran it last year in our corn crop and had no problems except for one situation where we had what we call seeps around the edge of a field where the operator got into some sunflowers that were green and sticky. And as Nick said, it stopped up immediately. Uh, Other than that, though, it works fine in corn. But this year, what happened to us was we had a very good corn crop, and our machine we bought kind of based off of without the concept of using a seed destructor. So what we ran into this year was in a good corn crop, it ate up so much horsepower, the seed destructor and the good crop combined, that it was just slowing us down tremendously. And so we had to disengage it to get through our corn crop just because of speed. Uh, if this is a long-term solution, what we will need to do is go to a higher horsepower combine to meet those requirements. But we saw no problems in the corn. We really like it in the corn. Actually, it does. We have volunteer corn issues here because theoretically crops can grow almost year round here. Not quite, but close. So it reduces our volunteer problem. Where we have run into troubles, we grow sunflowers, and it did not work at all last year. Redekop came through with a like a sieve type deal to put above it to try to help the long sunflower stalks get on over and not hang up. And so, Emily, I don't know if you want to show that picture. There was a picture in there of what Redekop added to that.
Yes, I'll
Uh,
pull that up right now.
it's kind of hard to see. I took the picture, but it was inside that combine. It was dark, but it did make an improvement on it this year where we went to yeah, there it is. That's excellent. Last year, where you see the black tines, there was just actually a V-shaped piece to kind of help get the stalks on over the top away from the seed destructor, and they would just drape around that V-shaped piece. This year, they added those uh, tines you see there to try to give it a little more guidance to get it all the way over and not to fall down. Where that was an open void area where those tines are right now. That was an open area, and the piece is missing out of this, and I'll tell you the reason why in just a minute. But if you could picture in your mind, behind those tines is a piece of metal that guides it on over the large stalks into the straw chopper or spreader. Uh, and so what we found is when they added this year, when our sunflowers were very, very dry, it worked just fine. But the second we got into some sunflowers with a little bit of moisture, as Nick was mentioning, even with this apparatus, it still stopped up. And so in the middle of harvest, we were trying to hurry and finish the piece that goes right there to divert that trash away from the seed destructor into the the straw chopper. We took it out and just turned off the seed destructor because it continues to plug up. So they improved it. If they were really desiccated, it probably would have worked, but it was still a problem. So that's a long answer to your question, I guess, but that's our experience.
No, I think that's great. Because certainly and the iHSDs are not immune to the green high moisture issues either. I think that's a problem fairly universally across the mills, is that as a Canadian farmer said, if it gets over about 25% green, you're going to start having problems. And if it's 50% green, then you better like cleaning out the back of a combine by hand. So it's certainly, I think, an issue that's there, and people need to be aware of it. I think it's also good to see, even if it only solves part of the problem, what Redekop's done with that tine deflector kit. These companies are all aware of the issues and designing, solutions to try to alleviate that. But it could be just like you said, there's cases where you run it, and where you don't. Maybe we'll just lean into the learning curve issues some more. One of the questions in there is it possible to disengage and re-engage the Seed Terminator on the fly? And so maybe the Druffels, you guys can answer that.
No, not really. I mean, once you're on there, you're pretty well committed for every crop. I suppose if you could, but it's not really a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But with everything that we're cutting here, changing of the mills themselves is as taking care of whatever problems we did have. And realistically, if you're cutting that green of wheat, you shouldn't be there anyway.
Sure. I'm curious. One thing we've looked at is there a relationship between the grain moisture, right, that you can see that value in your cab versus the chaff moisture that's actually coming into the mill itself? Those appear from our data to be two separate numbers. They don't seem to be very related. Maybe has that been your experience as well?
No, I mean, the only time we ran into some green wheat is we had seeded a bunch of spring wheat into some fall wheat, and we thought, okay, we got 5 acres here, let's just cut it and get out of here. Well, that didn't work. So for the most part of harvest, there's really not much correlation there between moisture content.
And our harvest usually runs from, good rule of thumb is July 25th to August 5th, maybe it's a starting point. And so the month of August, it's been a long time since we've had a rainy harvest. With chickpeas and that, we're running clear into the middle to the end of September, depending on the year. This year we were done early, but for the most part, we haven't even had to really worry about it too much in wet grain.
Okay. Rodney, how about turning on and off the Redekop SCU? And yeah, how easy or not easy is that?
So on the fly is not a possibility that I can see at this point. As far as in our sunflower situations where we've had to turn it off, it takes 30 minutes to get it where you can. And I think once we understand the whole process, we can do it less time than that, probably a whole lot less time, where we can just divert the seed destructor and go straight back to the chopper, the straw chopper. So no, not on the fly with the Redekop, but it's not a big process to divert it.
Yeah, my experience with the Redekop is the baffles can either be removed or can kind of be folded up. And then there's in the drive line, there's a disconnect that's fairly similar to like a PTO connection on a tractor that you can disconnect. So you do have to get out of the cab, and then raise the straw chopper up out of the way, but it can be done.
Yeah, our biggest problem, Dr. Flessner, is turning off the electronic controller where it doesn't beep at you in the cab. That was the biggest thing, getting somebody in Redekop to tell us where to turn the monitor
Okay.
off. It was telling you it wasn't spinning. So that was the bigger problem than actually disengaging the seed destructor.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I know. And then there's the iHSD, which to turn it off, you have to remove the belt. So it's, you got to release the belt tensioning pulley there, and then open up the doors that are on the bottom and the back of it. And so even when it's off, the material still flows kind of through the baffle, and then instead of getting diverted into the mills that are, again, that vertical orientation on the left and right, it just falls out of the back there. So it almost chaff lines a little bit in the sense that it condenses some of the residue there. Okay. Well, maybe we can get, if there's questions later, we'll get into more harvest conditions. But how about combine performance? I know can't recall who mentioned that it did maybe slow harvest speed, but what other observations have you had around the amount of fuel consumed and harvest speed and maybe maintenance costs?
Well, they like horsepower, period. It takes a minimum of 100 horse to run it. So we have a S680, but it's pretty hot to run it. Where we're crawling around on the hills up here in the Palouse, we need all the horsepower we can get, and it actually takes a lot of horsepower. Fuel wise, you burn a lot of fuel. So we figure it's costing us what, $4 an acre?
Yeah, about $4 an acre.
$4 an acre to run it. So
Just for fuel?
yep.
Okay.
And we're, like I said, we're running that on a S680 with a 40-foot McDon Draper.
Okay. Very good.
In probably 80 to 100 bushel wheat.
Okay. And one question that's in the chat is how does the mill deal with the extreme slopes in the Palouse? Does that affect the mill?
No, we have no issues because it's a direct link to the combine, so it's not on the leveling chassis. It's on the main chassis of the machine, and everything coming out of that mill is just basically flour. So we don't see any lining of the residue coming out of there. It's just turns it to dust and it just goes about its way.
Okay. And so is there, I don't know, maybe you have enough experience, but is there an expected return on investment that you have right now in terms of number of seasons of use, maybe number of acres?
That's a hard one to tell because, we're so new at this, only being into it for 2 years. We really, you should calculate it out, but we didn't. We just knew that we needed to get into it. And so we just went down that road.
Okay. Rodney, how about you? What are your experience with how the mill, in your case, the Redekop seed control unit affects combine performance?
I will agree with the Druffels. It loves diesel and horsepower. And we're harvesting. Our wheat yields can go from 50 to 90. So we have a wider variety of range. When you're in that 30, 40, 50 bushel wheat, you really don't notice it a whole lot. When you start getting up above 50 bushel, 60 bushel wheat, you start to notice it. It really starts to slow you down to keep the horsepower there. But like I say, in our situation, we knew going into this, we were probably undersized for what we were about to do because it is a damp, when we're harvesting wheat, it is very damp. I have not put a dollar to the cost, but I would say we're slowing ourselves down. We probably go from 5 miles an hour selling corn to 3. So it's a substantial drag on your speed and good wheat. But I have not put a cost figure to it. As far as the reliability of the unit, it's been incredible. It's been no problems with the actual machine itself as far as operating. It's just it eats up a lot of fuel.
Okay. I know in Australia, they've commented that you essentially you bump down kind of one combine class in capacity when you add the mill because of that horsepower draw. So if you're expecting the capacity of a class 9, when you put the mill on that class 9, it kind of bumps down to an 8, and if you put it on an 8, it kind of bumps down to a 7. So, but they've also kind of commented that it's not every field, and I think you guys have touched on that, where some fields you don't see reduction in the travel speed during harvest, and then sometimes you have substantial ones. So maybe on average, it's about 10% there is what I've heard. So, um, well, I'm curious. Maybe we get into what were your expectations for the mill when you got it, and are you starting to see any differences in weed pressure? Maybe go to Rodney first on this one.
I had no predefined expectations. I mean, this was just like studying Greek. I mean, we had literally knew nothing about it. Uh, my we're going into our second, so our true evaluation of this product will be how well it controls the Italian ryegrass through the winter, and we are starting on our second winter where we kind of pick it up. And I will tell you the greatest thing has been the volunteer wheat. It shows up through the summer, even because our wheat will actually come up in the summertime, our volunteer wheat, and it's incredible. It does do what as advertised. I would say your statement of it being 90 to 99% effective is a very accurate statement from what we've seen in volunteer wheat. The Italian ryegrass, this is just, it really doesn't come up till the heart of winter. So I don't want to go out there and make a public statement about how effective it's going to be. It appears to be very good, but we're really just getting into our second season of getting to see how much ryegrass is coming up behind it. But I will tell you where the plots are, at least at this point in the growing season, there is a visual difference. But there's no doubt in our mind that it's working effectively. It's dust, as somebody said earlier, when you stand behind it. It literally pulverizes everything. So you learn where your leaks are on your machine and your header, because you're not going to find any seeds coming out from behind the destructor itself. It pulverizes them. So it does have a little neat side benefit, is if you find wheat on the ground, you don't have to worry about it being scattered out by the stalk chopper. You're going to be able to follow it straight to the leak on the combine or the header. It's got a problem because there's no seed coming out of that destructor. So a little early to make a broad statement about weeds, but I think we can look at the wheat itself and say it does do as you've stated.
Very good. What about you guys, Nick and Dale? Are you seeing any differences in your weed populations yet?
No, we're kind of like Rodney. We're just 2 years into it. I would say that, we were kind of hoping for maybe see something within 5 years?
Yeah.
5 years was kind of a timeline for us to really see if it's doing its thing.
Hopefully that it's taken away a bunch of the seeds that are going back into the seed bank. Just like Rodney, we see it with our volunteer wheat. You're always going to have rotor loss, so you're always going to have some, but anything coming out of the mills is non-existent. And Emily's got a couple pictures that I sent her. I don't know if she wants to bring them up. That
Yep, I can do that now.
That shows what we got.
It does make powder.
Maybe while she's pulling those up, one question in the chat was, is mayweed or dog fennel seed another issue, or does it destroy easily? I think you guys said you might have some of that.
It destroys it to a point. But if you look at this photo, these are our two combines that ran side by side, and everything you can see right to the green line down the middle. Everything on the right is the one with the combine without. Everything on the left is with the Seed Terminator. So you can see that there's still a little bit of green out there, but that's rotor loss. That's not shoe and rotor loss. So that's a pretty good picture that kind of shows what we're trying to achieve. As far as sending, you can see up here to the lower left, that combine was again the Seed Terminator. Everything to the right on that slope was done by our combine without. We always thought that, and it depends too, straw load is huge on whether you're going to manage seed termination. This crop here was spring wheat, so it's pretty thin. You can see the first 3 rounds were done by the combine that Dale drives with the Seed Terminator. The other rounds were done with the other combine. We find that the heavier the straw load, we will see more volunteer, just because we have more rotor loss. If you get to digging around in that straw, you will see that everything came off the chute is gone. And if you start equating it out, and I do a lot of drop catches, that 90% of our loss is coming off of our rotors.
Wow, you mentioned doing the drop catches, and you guys have 2 different combines. So I guess you're sort of evaluating it as where the modified combine runs versus where the conventional combine runs. But yeah, I guess are there other ways you guys plan on evaluating it and making decisions, I guess, in about 5 years of whether it's paid off or not?
You know, we've got one field that we're starting to see pressure from oats. And our goal is to keep this one machine in that area that has oat pressure on it, to see if we can start to deplete that pressure. You know, with the wheat seed bank.
Yeah.
That's one of our biggest goals. We see that, you know, on a couple of our farms that have Italian rye, you know, we've seen a decrease in that rye substantially with the practices that we're using as far as the chemistry and mechanical. So, you know, I'm hoping that maybe the 3rd year, 4th year, we're going to see more results. And by that 5th year, we're hoping that we get a big return on our investment.
Yeah, we'll say the farms in Australia that have had a researcher track things over time, the weed seed bank doesn't really bottom out until maybe 5, 6, sometimes even 8 years, depending on which weed species you're talking about. So, you know, you're, like you guys mentioned, you're eliminating the additions to the seed bank, but what's already there in the soil, it's going to take time for that to come up and be exhausted. So it's probably not a single season turnaround, right? I think that's fair to say, at least what we've seen so far from you guys.
Yeah, with the first year we had it, you know, we had a field across from the shop that was a nice south slope, and it was spring wheat, and it went over 100 bushel. And so what I had Dale do is I had one combine take half the field, one combine take the other half, and I thought, boy, we're really going to see results. Well, it happened to be that crop went completely flat, and so we had to run every bit of straw through those combines, and you couldn't see the line at all, just because the amount of material went through those machines, and we had rotor loss. So, you know, your expectations are not quite what it's going to be when you first start off.
Sure. I guess maybe we could talk more about that in terms of, you know, one of the things with harvest weed seed control, whether it's a mill or some other form, is especially in something in wheat where you typically would harvest fairly high to try to put less straw through. Now you want to harvest lower to get more weed seeds in, which then brings in more straw. And then there's, of course, all kinds of different threshing speed and clearance and air speed and all that. How difficult was it to still get like clean grain and account for all those other adjustments with the mill on there?
We're still getting good grades, if that's what you're asking. They haven't really changed that part of it, but we had to slow down too. You know, we're probably running at 3 miles an hour, I would suppose, something like that. Maybe before we were running 3.5, you know, we lost a half a mile an hour. But the 2 years that we've run it, our yields have been down because we were drier. Now, when we get up over that, we can achieve 100 to achieve 100 fairly easy, but we have had crops as high as 130 bushel. And when we get into something like that, it's really going to be interesting to see how fast we can travel because of the straw load.
Sure. Rodney, what was your experience with getting the mill on there and then still getting clean grain? Is it pretty seamless as well?
Yes, we haven't seen a lot of difference. I will tell you, with some of the people I've spoken with, I think probably we can do a better job with trying to reduce our rotor loss and get more through that seed mill. I think we can probably do a better job. And one of the areas that for our farm probably needs a lot more work is to set up our combine better to get more of the weed seeds into the seed destructor. As far as the grain quality, we haven't changed a whole lot. Our grain quality continues to be like it was prior. It just slows us down, and I do think there's a vast area there to still learn how to better set up the combine because your goals have changed. Before you were trying to keep as much residue out of that machine as you can and not concerned about you want the weed seeds out of the shakers. And so our goals have changed, and I don't think I've got my head wrapped around that real well yet as to how to set that machine up to be more efficient at actually getting the weed seeds down to that destructor. So one of the things I was going to comment on earlier about the amount of seed we're destroying, we actually, Dr. Muthu, his grad student, we actually this year I rode on top of the combine and poured a measured amount of seed into the combine, and then we captured everything that came out the back. And so the grad students are in the process of weighing all that and trying to figure out the answer to that question is how much we're actually getting destroyed. Is it really 98 or is it 92? But it'll be an interesting study for people to look for this from you guys as to how efficient it was. Because we poured a known amount of seed that we weighed and caught everything that came out of the back of the combine. So
Yep, and that's part of the results I spoke to earlier. The so far, and it is some ongoing research, but so far what we've seen is very high seed kill rates from pretty much every combine and seed impact mill we've tested, and pretty much every weed seeds we've put into it, except for that Italian ryegrass that was a little bit lower there. Well, why don't we jump to what advice do you have for someone who's considering purchasing a seed mill? Maybe Rodney, we'll start with you.
Advice number one, and we spoke of it, is if you're making a living farming and time is important, then you really need to be serious about upgrading your combine size or tuning the motor to get more horsepower out of it. Number two, I would say that it's not just a 2-hour job to install the device. It's at least in our situation, we're not real great mechanics, but it's an involved couple-day process if you don't know what you're doing. We were fortunate enough to have somebody to help us, but that would be my second piece of advice. And then third, and the most important, is until they kind of fine tune it, anything green is a problem. If you're harvesting a crop that tends to have a lot of wet stalk in it, you really need to think twice until they kind of get the technology more refined. So that's the 3 points that I would bring out to somebody that calls and asks me about it, which I've had that happen. That's kind of the way I've put it. So.
Okay.
I would have to say, for us in the Pacific Northwest, you need a Class 9 combine minimum. I mean, the amount of horsepower that the impact mills eat up is amazing. You can do it with a Class 8 as long as you modify it. It's one of those things that, yeah, you got to do a lot inside to make sure that the combine's performing correctly. You know, concaves, rub bars, all that has a big impact on the way that machine thrashes, separates, the amount that's coming over the shoe. It's all huge, and you've got to spend a lot of time dialing that combine in. And like Rodney said, when we installed that thing, we spent about 3 days. For us, it's very unique. You know, with the leveling combine, we had to make special hitches and things for the mill to sit on the back of the combine, to drive it. It just changed a lot. I know that from working with Seed Terminator, if you're just a stock level land combine, you know, they can do it in a day. For us, it was more like a 3-4 day process to get it on.
But maintenance on it so far, we've run it 2 years, and they had a changeover kit on the belt drive this summer,
Mhm.
and they were really good to work with. I mean, as far as providing the parts and everything, just to get it changed over. So instead of running 2 belts, we're running 1 belt now, and our slippage went down substantially as far as the belt slippage.
You know, the whole key to that impact mill is you got to keep your RPMs up. So those rotors got to be spinning at 2,800 to 3,000 RPMs. The minute they start falling off, you know, it's going to tell you, it's going to start chirping at you. And you really got to back out of it quickly because you got to keep that mill speed up.
Great. Trying to think what other questions we have before we go into the questions in the chat box. Curious how it, and this is kind of one of the questions in the chat, is it, how does it fit with your other weed management tactics? Like for example, is it changing the way you're using herbicides or the amount of herbicides you're using?
I'll start with this one. You know, when we went into this, you know, everybody talked about it that I talked to says, oh, you can just cut your costs on your chemicals and stuff. We thought to ourselves, you'll never do that. I mean, you might change the way you spray your crops and things, but you're not, you know, our whole goal in the end is to deplete that weed bank, to get rid of those weed seeds. So you start cutting costs on your chemicals, you're just inviting that plant to just make more seeds. So when we went into this, you know, we didn't change anything that we did. We still spray the same. We don't cut rates. We just basically added another tool to our toolbox to help with weed situation.
And in our country, where we're harvesting in August, end of July to into August, we kind of had to maybe change our varieties a little bit though to get the earlier variety, because that Italian rye or whatever we're going after will shatter out before we can get it cut. So that we had to do a little bit of something like that. Luckily, we had good varieties that we could go to that would mature earlier.
That's an interesting modification of the program there for those earlier maturing varieties to get more seed on the plant at the time of harvest. How about you, Rodney? Have you changed any of your sort of weed management approaches, or maybe like that gone to earlier maturing varieties or hybrids?
So we're fortunate here. Our varieties are a little bit ahead of our Italian ryegrass, so we've got the opposite that Nick and Dale have. So that's not an issue. We're doing it on small scale plots where we're not doing any herbicide program. My personal opinion is this is exactly what Nick said. This is another tool in the toolbox that we can use herbicides and this to reduce that weed bank. My gut feeling tells me that with this tool in 5, 6, 7 years, as we deplete that soil bank in the soil, that we may be able to reduce our herbicide cost a little bit. But typically what happens is a new weed emerges. And so we'll have to shift our patterns. You would assume you guys, researchers, will figure out a way to solve this for us. I feel confident. And I think this may be the solution for ryegrass. But then a new one will pop up and we'll just have to adjust from there. But the situation we're in today is I feel like it just adds to our herbicide programs and makes them more effective because it reduces the pressure.
Very good. Are there any weeds that you guys have seen that won't be a good fit? So like one question I have is weeds that have wind dispersal mechanisms for their seeds. So if they're on the plant at the time of harvest, does the reel hit those and the cloud of weed seeds just go off into the breeze, or are there other weeds that I'm not thinking of that aren't going to be a good fit that you've experienced?
You know, you got Canadian thistle. When we get to it, you know, it's fuzzed out if we haven't sprayed it beforehand. But that would, in this area, would be one crop that the minute the reel hits it, that it would fluff. So it'd be pretty tough to get that through the machine. I mean, 100% of it or whatever.
Yeah, maybe enough to really make a dent in it. And it's also rhizomatous, right? And so that's one thing to think about too, is we're only gonna be, if we get the seeds in, we're only gonna be killing the seeds, but the rhizomes down in the soil aren't gonna be effective. How about you, Rodney? Have you seen anything like that, like Canadian thistle?
No, I mean, our hope was pigweed is a huge problem here in our corn crop, and we had hoped that we could see a reduction in pigweed pressure, but it's number one, you leave a lot of seeds on the weed itself when that coordinator goes through there, but the vibration of the header too, when it hits it, shatters it too, like they're talking about with the weed header. So when you're thinking about corn, you just don't get all those weed seeds in there, and it's helping. But it's just there's too many of them on a big weed. There's just thousands and thousands of seeds, and so you lose a little that stick to the stalk, you lose some to shatter, and then you kill some. But that's in wheat. This addresses our problem perfectly because ryegrass, Italian ryegrass, is our main target. We were hoping as a secondary benefit of this tool would be that maybe we could get some seed destruction on the pigweeds, but it's just you can't get enough of them in there in the actual combine to destroy them.
With a corn header.
Yes, sir, with the corn header.
Mhm.
So I think if like grain sorghum or the sunflowers where we're cutting, I think it'll be effective on those, but even then I think you get a little bit of shatter from on those bigger, tougher weeds like that. It's just not as gentle to cut it off as it is with a weed head or ryegrass head.
Yeah, I think that's one area that we needed as researchers do more in is looking at the seed shatter right there at the front when the cutter bar and the reel hits it, or how much are we losing there? I know a paper out of Missouri looked at that, and they saw with water hemp, so one of our pigweed species, I think it'd be between 20 and 40% seed loss right there when it's contacted by the front. So potentially there's maybe some settings, real speed, real height, that maybe you could get more weed seeds in. Have you guys played around with any of that as terms of raising the reel up when a big weed's coming to make sure it feeds in easily, or not really? Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, let's get into some of the questions here in the Q&A. The question right at the top is when it gets plugged, how easy is it to unplug?
I will be happy to answer that because there's been a many a cussing. uh, those sunflowers, hours to get them out of there till we figured out what we were doing wrong. It is unbelievable how tight they can pack in there. Uh, but I will say our situation is a little different than your picture. And our sunflowers, it just actually just you have quite a bit more loss of sunflowers and combining. You can't separate them out as well. The actual mill itself, we've never had it plug up, but where it bunches up on top of the combine before when it's coming off the top of the sieves, that's where it's plugged up on us, and it's taken us a while the first two times it happened, we didn't realize what was going on, and it packed it in there so tight, it took a couple hours to dig it out. So that's why anybody that asks me or calls me about this, that's one of the things I do tell them is be cognizant of the green stalk issue, and because it is a nightmare to get it out.
Nick and Dale, maybe you guys haven't had a pluggage, but
So
Yeah.
your lower left picture there is a classic example of what will happen. I mean, the minute that rotor speed drops to zero, you shut the combine down instantly. You go back, you raise the straw chopper up, you pull the baffle assembly off that's going into that mill. And it's usually not plugged too bad. You can usually take a long screwdriver, just kind of once you get it working, you can just unplug it, shove it out through the chutes, and just start it up, get everything flowing. You're looking at 15-20 minutes on a pretty good plug.
yeah, I think the how quickly you catch it is directly correlated to how long it takes to unplug. When I've been riding in the combine with some farmers running these, you hear those RPMs drop, or you hear something a little bit different, and the ones that have shut it down quickly, we've been much easier to pull out. But certainly it can get pretty bad, as these pictures show. One thing, I guess, for all these pictures up, I'll just comment. The one in the upper left, that was actually the iHSD when it was in the off position. And so you see where the material still has to kind of come out of the box when you take the door off and kind of over that cross auger. And if you've got those stems that can kind of bridge and still block that opening in there. So ideally those would be up in the rotor, and maybe there's some better settings, but that was a case for us, particularly when we got in that green stem you see down there at the bottom. Yeah, so here's kind of what that can look like. Another question in the chat is organic wheat fields would seem to benefit greatly from one of these mills. Has anyone heard of that being tested? I guess in Australia or elsewhere? I'll just say I have not heard of that testing in organic fields, but
I haven't either, but I would think that the main trick to organic would be to windrow it, and then run it through the combine with the mill on it.
so what difference do you think that would make? Would that just help give it more dry time, or?
It would give it more dry time.
Mm-hmm.
That's, again, the whole trick. It's got to be dry to go through that mill.
Yeah, I would think the greenness would still be just as much of an issue, maybe even more of an issue in organic production than with the weeds. That generally more in organic versus conventional. So, okay. One question is, as a grower, would you recommend this to other growers in your region? At least another tool, despite the cost.
The initial investment up front is huge. I mean, if you're going to buy one, you better hopefully plan on it to be, like you said, a 5 to 6 to 8 year return on your investment. Would I recommend it? I think so. We're only in our second year. Hopefully in a couple more, I can say a yes, no answer after that. But right now, it's up for debate.
Okay. What do you think, Rodney?
So I would agree with Nick's statement. My gut feeling is, if my neighbor called me today, I would tell them I need a year or two more to tell them 100% sure that that this concept's going to work. I see no reason why it won't, but I think to put my name behind it and just say absolutely, I recommend this, I would say I'm still a year or two away from that. But that being said, I am quickly becoming convinced that if you have a particular weed that is a major problem that has become resistant, and you get northeast of Dallas, Texas, they have a much bigger problem with ryegrass. If somebody like that called me, I would probably be more inclined to say yes, it's worth the investment. Where it's a marginal problem like we have here, it's a little bit more difficult to say that yet until I see the longer term studies. But where you have a major resistance problem and there's no other effective means, I think this is a no-brainer from what I can see really a year and a half into this.
Okay. Another question in the chat is, any idea on how many mills are running in the U.S.? A researcher in Western Canada thinks there are about 35 running here. I guess I could take a crack at that. My understanding, and others jump in here, is there are about 30 running in the Pacific Northwest region. And I would guess there's probably 50 or fewer across the United States. That's kind of a pretty good hip shot, but I think that's about the number we're looking at. As of a couple of years ago in Australia, there was approaching about 500 Seed Terminators, additional about 500 iHSDs, and I think about 250 Redekops in Australia. So they're as we've mentioned, ahead of us in this game, and there's more adoption there. Not that their harvest conditions are identical to ours, which because they're generally can be different in a lot of cases, but there are quite a few of these units kind of when you look at the global perspective out there. But like I guess we've also discussed, there's still some room for improvement, and you're hearing that with the seed, the tine deflector addition for the Redekop and the belt modification for Seed Terminator and others. So I guess are there any other questions that we need to address? Well, great. If not, we will put up this survey link here. So so part of the Grow team, we are interested in those of you that have used a mill and are have some experience with it. If you could kind of complete our early adopter survey here, you could either scan that QR code with your phone, or the link is down there at the bottom. We're trying to get a survey to answer a lot of the questions that we've asked here today, as well as some additional questions we have there. So if you have experience with the mill or know someone who has, please share that with them.
Yes, and otherwise I would just give a big thank you to our panelists. I know many of you still have things to do right now, even though we are getting towards the winter months. So I really appreciate you taking time to talk about this. We lean very hard on progressive maverick farmers who are the first to try new tactics like this. So we really appreciate it when you guys give us so much of your time. One other note, we have recorded this and we will post it on our news page next week. I'll send out an email to everybody who registered for it with that link. But another great way to find things on our news page is just to subscribe on the website. And Michael, if you go to the next slide, I think that will remind people where they can do that. Everything on our news page gets sent to you in a single weekly newsletter. So that's a good way to keep up to date on webinars like this, as well as other news items that we track. So I think that's everything, unless we have any lingering questions, or Michael, you wanted to add anything else?
No, just thanks again to Nick and Dale and Rodney for sharing their insights and experience. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you, Michael, for moderating. This was great. Yeah.